What's the state of the union of racism now in London, and how does that compare to America, or to your limited travels that you've seen in America?
Yeah. London's very conservative. The racism, and this is just in London, I know that if you go to other parts of the UK, the racism is a lot more overt. They let you know about it. But whereas in London, it's conservative, it's nuanced, it's there, and you see it in the glare. It's in the way someone looks at you. It's in the way that someone says, oh, did you write that poem? Did you write that story? Yeah, I did. All by you? Yeah, me. The guy that looks like this, with the beard and the skin and the hair, and me, I wrote the book. Wow, that's impressive. And that's the kind of racism. It's so subtle, and they, for the life of them, would never ever say that is racist. But when you become attuned and you are sensitive to something, you pick up on things they don't. And that's the really, really interesting part. It's what's accepted. What is, someone thinks that if I was to use the N-word, that is what constitutes racism. They don't regard it, how it can live in any other context. And anything else is, you're being too sensitive now, just calm down. Oh, you're just trying to exasperate a situation in order to blah. I'm not. I'm telling you that this is actually racist. And when you break it down to people, they're embarrassed, they're ashamed. I don't think, people know that racism is a horrible thing. They know that it's illogical, and it's associated and attributed to people who are not as well educated, not as well cultured, and not as well rounded, or haven't got that critical faculty that can break down and go into the thinking, why do I think like this? That's a very fundamental question. I mean, if everybody actually asked themselves for a second, why do I actually think like this? I think half the world would be a much better place. As Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And it rings true, because the ability to think and to think critically is I thought everyone could do that. I thought that faculty existed, and they do, but we get boxed in via the media, via suggestive thinking, into perceiving each other a certain way. And when your point of reference is the Daily Mirror and the Sun newspaper, which are the two most consumed newspapers in the whole of the Britain, it's going to reflect on the people and the way they engage and regard each other.
We have this kind of shame culture, and it's as much in America as with the publications you said, where, like you said, there'll be the overt piece of racism, sexism, whatever. Shame, shame, shame. The person gets ostracized, and then we all feel better and we've done our role. And this seems to be just a never-ending cycle now, and it's exacerbated by the social media and by things taken out of context. Where are we going with this? Or do you notice this?
All the time. And it sells papers, but it's the status quo. It's what consecrates culture and thinking. How do you affect the person's thoughts if you control the media and you control their reference point? They're not reading an interdisciplinary analysis of the history of racism and slavery. They're not interested in that. They just want to see a very simplified article that is full of conjecture most of the time, projected outwardly, looked into, and saying, yeah, this is true. I believe this. It's written in a way that appeals to me, to my kind of person, and I believe it. Most of the people in these right-wing tabloid papers that try to comment on Islam have never read the Quran. And the priests that comment on it have never read it either. So my thing is that how are you supposed to have a system that feels correct in commenting on an entire culture, a 1,000-year-old culture, without actually having read the very thing that they're trying to critique? You wouldn't apply that to a book. You wouldn't get a critic. I'm going to Dan Brown, his latest book, I'm going to review it. I haven't read it, but I'm going to review it just from the title and just from the blurb. I'm going to write a few little bits and bobs on it, and then people saying, yeah, it's a great review, fantastic review, and it's horrible. And I'm not a religious person myself. I'm kind of regard myself as agnostic, but I do know that within all philosophical beliefs, there is definitely an element of peace and of unity and of humanism that, is exasperated by media, is exasperated by fundamentalists, and they take certain parts. But that can be said for the KKK. Yet they don't ever get marketed. They're still functioning. The EDL, the BNP, UKIP, the way they incite violence and racial hatred is definitely a criminal act. There's people on Twitter all day long who incite racial hatred, and it falls under a criminal act, yet they're allowed to get away with it. Yet if somebody of colour or if somebody of a certain belief system does the same thing, the media will clamp down on it, and they'll spin it in a sensational way and say, the terrorist is saying Fight back. It happened with Palestine. It happens with all across the board, where you get something that doesn't quite fit the status quo of a system. You'll get that. And the sad part is, I don't even care for that. What I care for is the fact people buy it. That's the upsetting thing. People want to sell papers. They've got a job to do. If they can go to bed at night knowing that they've just created that complete chaos and delusionment, then that's their thing. But for someone to read it and say, yeah, this is factual, this is good stuff, this is empirical evidence that says the Quran is definitely something that should be burnt and left, then that's more worrying.
This week on London Real, we have the English rapper, poet, and journalist, Akala.
Hate by the pound surrounds my reflection. I do this for my own protection.
If I didn't go to Pan-African Saturday School, if I didn't grow up in the Hackney Empire, if I didn't listen to Wu-Tang Forever or read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was 9, would I be the person I am today? Probably not.
One too many man that could have been doctors end up spending the whole life boxed up.
Hip-hop was my life. It was something I lived. I loved interacting with it. I wrote lyrics every day. I was in battles.
Cause to me, all they do is breed conflict.
First time I saw someone get stabbed, I was 12, and it was a little poke. It was a meat cleaver in the back of a guy's head. I had other teachers that felt that a person from my racial, cultural, economic background, and certainly from my socioeconomic background, should not have been top of the class. These were guys who were doing well in the street, but they'd spent so much of their life in and out of prison, etc. But they were like, you don't want to be like us. You're clever. In fact, if you drop out of school, we're going to give you a hiding.
Yeah, they say you are British, and that lovely patriotism they feed you. But in reality, you have more in common with immigrants than with your leaders.
If the music is good enough, if the visual is good enough, if your online interaction is decent, you can keep your integrity and have a career.
If we're honest, true strength is the strength to be honest.
Ultimately, any power structure in the world wants to stay powerful.
On Sunday, London Real presents Akala. Knowledge is power.
It's fear. But at 20, you can't admit it's fear.